Hello and welcome to Socially Numb. I am your host, Richie Leahy. We have a lot to talk about today. First things first, I talked to some other people about the structure of the show, and basically last week I had switched it to having trending news, things that were happening first, followed by sports, and then ending with gaming. Well, since I cover a lot of tech news, we figured that it might be best to move gaming into the beginning of the show with the tech news. So now we're going to go ahead and just have two main parts, and I think it'll be better helping down the road with getting guests on the show or having call-ins, because I don't know the length of the show, what we're aiming on, but instead of having three small parts, we now have two bigger parts, so it gives me a little bit more flexibility down the road on getting guests or having people call in and discuss like certain topics, so we can kind of go back and forth. And it's kind of set up to have like 2 or 3 guests a show, and they can come in and talk about their expertise areas. And then later on down the road, send in your feedback. If we keep getting feedback in certain areas, maybe we can split them up even further. But I think this is how it's going to be for the long term. Of course, I'm not going to keep switching it up each week. I know it feels like that, but we're still getting the first couple episodes under. I believe this is episode 4. So that's what we're leaning with right now. I know we made some changes the first couple shows, but we're going to go with this for a few weeks and see what happens. So first things first, there was a big hurricane here on the East Coast, Hurricane Matthew, and living in North Carolina, we got hit with a pretty big brunt of it, which knocked out our power for a few hours. I do know there are some people in my area that are still missing power, and internet is out for Time Warner cable customers, and there were some football games that were disrupted. But we're going to go ahead and get back into that when we talk about sports a little bit later. For tech news and trending news, we have the Hurricane Matthew. It just moved a bunch of different events up and down the East Coast. Roads were closed. I think they said 10 people died here in North Carolina due to flooding of the roads. There were cars that got in accidents. They weren't able to get out of the floodplain in time, which is always a very tragic story to hear about. So that's what happened here, mainly on the East Coast. There's another presidential debate. Not going to get really into politics on the show. I didn't even watch it. I was too busy watching football, so I don't have any comments on the debate. There was a leak online regarding the new Nintendo console, and this kind of stuff drives me crazy because it wasn't really a leak per se. I saw it trending on Twitter. I actually dug into it a little bit more before I saw that it was trending. And the crazy thing was, one guy on Reddit made a post about like inside knowledge. He said he was vetting some sources or something, and I briefly read it. And next thing I know, I see it trending, and I was like, oh, wonder if like a story broke. Maybe this guy knew what he was talking about. But all the other stories were just screenshots of this Reddit post. Like, it was the exact same post. I was kind of confused at first because I looked at it and I was like, this looks exactly familiar. All they did was crop out like the Reddit signs, and it looked like there was like some Photoshop to remove his name. So it looks like that the newspaper made like a little table of release notes for Nintendo when actually it was just a bulleted list from Reddit. So it was crazy. Why even report it? Is that what the news is coming to? And then people wonder why no one reads newspapers anymore, because it's all hearsay and other random garbage. But online magazines, I don't really understand. Like, give the guy credit. Like, so some other guy is going to claim that he made that screenshot, and I mean, he didn't even retype it, and it was like 2 or 3 different sites that I saw. And I mean, maybe they were all related. Maybe the guy from Reddit is a writer for one of these other media outlets. I don't know, but it was just very strange and very fishy. And I've seen it done in a bunch of different topic areas. So it's not just a one isolated case here. I just don't get it. Like, why cover the news if you're just going to go on hearsay on what you see on social media from some anonymous poster on Reddit? I don't get it. So the Nintendo news, though, was that their next console, codenamed NX, I think, is going to be released either this year or early next year. I'm not really sure, but it was basically like a package deal. Some retailers have received like an early package, I guess, that has like the box so they can see how many fit on their shelves or whatever. I've never worked in retail, so I don't know if that's something that happens. So it's basically a box with all the specs like blurred out and some other details of like promotions and bundle packages. So they were talking about a new console. It's going to be like $300 with the bundle being maybe $400. And I'm rounding up, of course. I'm not telling you that $299 because that's a marketing gimmick. But you have $300, $400 for a new Nintendo console, which is a little bit more expensive than their older consoles. I believe the Wii was like only $200 when it came out. And I could be wrong on that, but I know it was substantially cheaper than the Xbox and the PlayStation, which is why they shot out of store shelves. Because casual people that didn't know, hey, I'm going to have a video game system for my grandchildren when they come over. A lot of grandparents had the Wii. It was cheaper, and it was something that looked cool on commercials and things. And a lot of people, they didn't even buy games for it. They just had the Wii Play. So I don't know if Nintendo's going to do something like that. I did hear, and this is more hearsay, that they were going to try to go with a mobile market, a mobile focus, because people were disappointed in the Wii U having a bulky controller that they couldn't actually take mobily. And I'm not really too sure on how they're going to be able to pull that off. The Wii U controller was like a bigger, bulkier thing. I just don't see how they're going to have like the battery life on that. It's going to be just like a tablet. And at this point in the game, as a parent, why would I buy a glorified tablet that only has one use? Me personally, I like to have less things. I used to be someone who had a bunch of different gadgets, things laying around I used to play with whenever I was in college trying to learn tech. But now that I'm getting older, I'm not that type of person. So if I have Nintendo who's starting to make mobile games, there's a Mario Run game coming out on iPhone. Yeah, I know it's not really an intuitive Mario game. I think the game is all him running. It's one of those runners, and you just swipe your hand to have him jump over obstacles. Not really Mario. But if I was like, hey, I wanted to play a Mario game just for nostalgia, right there I have it. I don't have to buy a $300 console just to play a Mario game. I actually still have a PSP that I hacked, and I guess jailbroke would be the correct term. Maybe I took and put an emulator on it. So I have all the original Nintendo games on an old PSP anyway. I don't even play any PSP games on it because I got it as like a media device before smartphones were really big. Actually, yeah, I don't know if they came out around the same time, but there weren't any games like apps. All the apps were like those Candy Crush things. And so I wanted an actual gaming device. So I got a PSP, and no one made games for it, basically. So I was like, I'm not going to waste my money. So I learned how to get inside. I jailbroke it, and I put some emulators on, and even an emulated version of Doom, I believe, or maybe Castle Wolfenstein 3D. I'm not really sure. So that was how I handled that. And I think the same thing is going to happen here if Nintendo goes the mobile console route. Now, maybe it'll be a surprise where they have something that plugs into the television and it's like a media box. Like, that's basically what video game consoles are becoming. Glorified media boxes. I know people that have them, they mainly stream Netflix, HBO, whatever through them. I know I'm guilty at that most of the time because it's something easier. I don't have to pay for cable. I get most of my cable over the air. Actually, yeah, I don't even pay for cable. So I guess I'm a cord cutter. I hear that a lot in sports terms. But a cord cutter just means that you don't pay for cable. You had it once, which I guess I technically never paid for it because it was supplied to my old apartment building. So they paid for it. It was like a perk of living there. So a cord cutter would be someone from the millennial generation who does not have cable. And it's why all the other cable companies are losing subscribers. So now, how do I watch shows? Well, I don't really care about what shows are trending or mainstream because a lot of them are garbage. Like if I wanted to watch a Kevin James comedy, I could just find an old King of Queens somewhere online streaming, or it's syndicated somewhere like on NBC during the day. I don't need to watch his new show with the same exact jokes he was telling a decade ago. So I just watch Netflix. That's the only subscription I really pay for. I pay for HBO whenever Game of Thrones and stuff is on. So that's how I get my media, and everything is through the PlayStation 4, or it would be through a computer. So if Nintendo is just going to have a $300 device come out that is only gaming, it doesn't have an offer for those other media options, that's where they're really going to mess out. And I think that they could even expand it a little bit more. If they're going to go in this small dedicated area towards gamers, why don't they give us some flexibility? Like, they could dominate the market if they did some research. And actually, they don't even have to do too much research because there's already emulators out for every Nintendo system. What they could do is even have, if the motherboard for the new system, whatever their new games are, they're trying to create a dedicated system. What they need to do is make a system that can play all the emulators for all their old games. And it doesn't matter what processor you need. Have someone on your team, hire someone who created the emulators. Emulators for all the old games have been around for a long time. And they don't even, for even the Nintendo games themselves, they don't even have to have an emulator. Have someone on your team work on a system that runs all of the old consoles. They've had years now. I mean, a Wii U is not a new console. You had the Wii. The Wii U is basically the same exact thing with just the extra controller pad. So why weren't you working on getting a system that could play all old Nintendo games from the cloud? That's what people would pay for. And they could even have it like Steam. And Steam is set up, if you don't have a computer, you don't know what computer gaming, PC gaming is. Steam is a marketplace for old games and new games, I guess. So if you wanted to play like a bunch of old games, that's where I get Doom, Duke Nukem 3D, and they're all on sale. You can get them for a couple bucks. Like there's a Halloween sale probably coming up. I know I got a ton of games for like $2 last year. And Nintendo should do the same exact thing. They should get together a cloud system. If they're going to go the handheld route, go the handheld route. Make like a small box for like $100 that plays any old game. They don't even have to go to the GameCube or even the Wii. Like just have it for GameCube past. And I mean, the processors now are fast enough that they can have one small device that plays all these old games. Make that your next console. It doesn't even have to be a full-fledged one. Someone released a mini Nintendo. I think Nintendo might have, which I'll bring in sometime. I don't know if it's out yet. But they had like an old Nintendo that they had all the game for. They knew what the code was because they wrote them. And they released like an old nostalgic Nintendo that just had 30 games. You didn't need cartridges. So why don't you just do that now? Start to put all your old games in the cloud. All the one that Nintendo owns. Reach out to these other publishers and say, hey, just to let you know, if you want a way to make some cash, we're going to be doing a cloud system for any game that was available on the Nintendo. And there were like 900 of them. I don't know who owns the rights for them, but if you put them in the system, we'll take 30%, whatever Nintendo's cut would be, just like Apple, 30%, and then you can keep the rest. And then have this console that if you buy through the Nintendo store, you have the rights to those games for life on any system that plays cloud Nintendo games. And even if they don't want to put the time into making cloud Nintendo games, why don't you just go ahead and have your developers write a little application like Steam for computers? put it on iPhone. See, get in talks. If you're not going to do dedicated consoles anymore and you're going to go this handheld route, start to talk to Sony, start to talk to Microsoft. Say, hey, what we're going to do is just make all of our old games available through this Nintendo store. Would we be able to put it on your system? And then you have a whole nother console war. Sony and Microsoft then up the stakes because now they have to compete with people who are going to get PC computers or even the Steam box, which is Steam's version of their marketplace. It's a Linux computer that runs Steam in big picture mode. What if they teamed up and had a Nintendo store on there so that you buy a game once and it goes back through time? And it's the same thing with the Wii. We had a semi-marketplace, but the games only worked on the Wii. No, that's ridiculous. If you rewrote the game to work on the Wii, you can have it rewrote so that it works on any system. And with the cloud now, they need to quit making games for only specific consoles. Because in a few years, it's going to be emulated anyway. And I know I had talked about gaming on a budget. I don't know if I'm going to have a segment on that or whatever. I'm not into piracy, so I'm not going to tell you to go download a bunch of illegal games. I know I said about putting an emulator on my phone, but I actually had cartridges for the Nintendo games. I've messed around with putting emulated games onto the actual cartridge. I've messed around with taking them off, taking out the chips. So I've actually experimented with games that I had. So I know a lot about it, and even the emulation, once it's on there, once the ROM has been ripped, it's just going to put a header on there. Now, I understand some games don't have the right decoders to go through, but I know there are thousands of original NES ROMs that are floating around. Why not put them on a store? Don't make them $5 or whatever. I mean, I think that's what they had them originally. Put the price much lower. You want people to pay for these. Or you can sell them in bundles. Hey, get 25 games for $15 or something, $10, $20. Something like that. Make it a discount because people, they already own these games back in the day. And you're not putting that much time into them. People do it for free to put them online. If you're worried about losing money, not making your profit line, that's what you need to do. And so we'll wait and see what happens in the next coming weeks with the Nintendo NX. But they have a gold mine there that they're sitting on. They could start to get into it, and then you wouldn't have to worry about what Nintendo system. If they're worried about people not buying the system, they don't want to buy a half-assed system every year because you keep putting one out. If I know, hey, I'm going to get a new system here, it's going to play all my old Nintendo Cloud games. All my old ones. Not some. Write it so that you can put on any of your future consoles. So that, hey, if I upgrade, I now get new games. Whatever the newest Mario is, the brand new Zelda. And I've played every Zelda besides some of the handheld ones that have came out recently. I don't know. I'd actually have to look at a list. Maybe I'll do that one episode. But I've been dedicated through the whole Zelda series. It was my favorite series growing up. And now I'm looking at a Nintendo Wii U, which is going to have the game. The price is going to get knocked down. I could probably pick one up for cheap just to play the game. Or I can wait and see what the Nintendo NX is going to be. But Nintendo could just go ahead and take that guesswork out. Because I'm not going to pay $300 for an NX and only have one game to play on it, or maybe a Mario Kart. Because let's be real, just like Call of Duty, those games are pretty much the same game over and over again. Ooh, wow, more graphics. Ooh, wow, a new controller to play with. But it's the same game. Same game. And I mean, there's not much they can do with it. It works. It's always fun. They started to add online, which was a whole new feature. I used to play online. I think they had ranked races. I want to say that I was ranked, but I might be wrong. I might be making that up. I don't know if they had a ranking board. I know I was ranked on the Wii for Madden. And then people accuse me of running the score up. But I'll tell that story sometime probably. But that is where Nintendo should go. Go with the cloud. Create your Nintendo store. Do it now. If you wait 5 years, 10 years, I mean, people are probably still going to be interested. But give them a reason to get excited about it now. Because if I know that if I buy a new Nintendo console, I can play any of my old games, I'm going to do it. And the thing is, They have a back catalog that is thousands of games, and they're so small that they don't even have to worry about this race to support 2 terabytes, 3 terabytes to store all the games. You could put thousands of Nintendo games on like a 1 gigabyte memory card. Not even a gigabyte. Probably one of those old memory sticks, like 512 megabytes or whatever. Like, you could go ahead and download thousands because they fit on the old cartridges back in the 80s and 90s. So they have a whole back catalog that's not going to take up a lot of space to emulate here on a new system. Go ahead, put them in the cloud, start working on clients for MacBooks, and you got to do it for Linux. Because if you're going to do it for Steam, you might as well go ahead and go all out. Make clients for Linux, Mac, do it for Windows, and do it for your own consoles. Add it as a feature. I know they had always toyed around with the Nintendo 64 at the bottom, had like a little clip where they were going to go ahead and put an attachment on that was going to like read discs or whatever. CD player, DVD player, later on down the line, they never did because everyone started churning out new consoles every few years. Go ahead and do that. Sell an add-on if you want. Have your base NX system, but have a feature where you can add on this cloud system once it's ready. I mean, you're not going to be able to rush it out if you're trying to rush out this new system. Have it in the books. Do it for next Christmas. If you're going to launch this Christmas with hopes of Zelda and you're going to bomb because people don't know what to expect, the price tag might be too high, next year is the year. Put this on. Start your cloud system. If you need someone to oversee it, give me a call. Look me up. I'll give you some insight because this is a gold mine that Nintendo is sitting on. But we'll come back to that. Hoping more details emerge this week or next week at the latest. If they're going to try to roll it out for Christmas this year, I don't see how they're going to be able to put it off much longer. But that was a big thing I saw in tech and gaming. And there's some other things that we'll talk about. I'm going to try to do a free game. Actually, it's not really a free game. I'm going to try to do like a cheap game, going back to the gaming on a budget, and just talk about like playing games that I got for cheap or free. I am PlayStation 4 owner. I have the PlayStation Plus. I just paid for the year. I don't have an Xbox. It's not because I'm going to get into a flame war. I don't know. I just always had PlayStation. I thought every time I wanted to get an Xbox, they were like trying to lock down the system. So if you remember, I was really gonna switch to an Xbox One, and then they released it. It has to be connected to the internet the whole time, and like things like that really turned me off. So right now I have a PS4. I wouldn't be averse to getting an Xbox. I've been looking into it, especially since they switched to Windows 10. But I'm just worried that Windows 10 is going to become a pay service, $9 a month. And yeah, I know I might just said I pay for a PlayStation Plus, but I don't want to pay for just an operating system. Because if I'm going to pay for Windows 10, does that mean that I still have to pay for Xbox Live? That's 2 costs for basically the same games, because I already said in an earlier podcast, I don't buy AAA titles as soon as they're released. So I'm going to do some features. I got some PlayStation Plus games for free. I was in a groove of beating 1 game a week. Normally I don't buy new games until I beat them. I have a backlog though from like switching systems. I still have some PlayStation 3 games to go through. I've been doing this for it's been a pretty long time since I was in college, at least a decade. I had the GameCube, and I had some 64 games. I think it started after the 64 games, because I remember I had Ogre Battle 64. It took me a long time to beat that. And then I think I was getting like GameCube games for like my birthday and Christmas. So I decided like, hey, I have all these games. One of the systems was coming out. It might have been a PlayStation 3. All my friends were getting it. They were like, hey, you going to get a new system? I didn't have the money at the time being in college, and I was like, you know what? I have all these other old games to beat, so I'm not going to get a new system until I beat all my games. So I meticulously went through, was beating a game a week on the GameCube, finally got them all. It was a couple years after PlayStation 3 had launched, so I did the same thing. I actually got the PlayStation 4 as a gift, which threw me back. So then I had 2 systems at the same time with games. So I have a bunch of PlayStation 3 games to beat. I want to say like maybe 20 games or so, because I download the free games too, and then I mainly play the PlayStation 4, so I haven't been getting caught up on those. But I'll be going through those, try to beat a game a week, see if I can get back into the groove, and I'll talk about what game I play, what system I'm on. I also have Steam, so I'll try to cover. I don't want to just hit one system and say like, hey, only PlayStation fanboys listen. If you listen to Xbox, great. Maybe there's a game that you like, recommend it to me. Maybe I can get it on Steam, or maybe on down the road I can get an Xbox. I'm still debating if I'm going to get the next Nintendo system. The last Nintendo system I bought was the Wii. Didn't feel like upgrading to the Wii U because it didn't give me anything different. Same games. There were no like first-party developer games that I didn't already have. And I don't feel like just getting like Mario Galaxy 3 or whatever came out for it. So that's what's going to be coming up next week, next couple weeks. I'm going to try to get that into a regular segment as well. Now switching on to sports. And again, just to reiterate, I'm trying to do like half and half. If you're not too much into gaming, skip to the sports section of the episode. I'm not going to split them into two separate podcasts. I like to do both. This is my main thing. Normally what I do throughout the week is game and watch sports. And I feel like there's a good clique out there of people that do both, but they don't have a podcast. There's not really any podcast dedicating to sports and gaming, tech and sports. It's usually one or the other. Like, hey, here's a podcast just on gaming. Here's a podcast just on sports. But I consider myself pretty much an everyman. So hopefully this mixes well, and we'll see how it goes. So we had the Hurricane Matthew on the East Coast, like I mentioned. It had some devastating effects. They postponed the Georgia-South Carolina game to Sunday, and they canceled the LSU-Florida game in the SEC. And I think they pushed back to Charlotte, UCF maybe? No, I don't think they played them. Maybe it was Florida Atlantic. So whoever Charlotte played, they pushed that game back as well. And last week, I talked about maybe just focusing on one area that's like overlooked, like of the country, talking about teams from only there. But as I started to do research on that and see, it just frustrated me more because you have the same thing. Like you have certain podcasts, certain media outlets that only cover certain conferences. They talk about them all the time. Like, ESPN with the SEC network, they only talk about the SEC teams. Well, what about other teams that were big? Like the Big Ten has 4 teams in the top 10, the first time since 1960, has a good chance of getting 2 teams in the playoffs of any conference. And they haven't really been talked about. I listened to a couple other new podcasts that came out that focused only on college football, and all they talked about were 1 or 2 teams. So, I feel like if you're going to put out a podcast, especially one that's geared at college football, and you only talk about a fraction of the teams, it's not a good look. So, I'm going to kind of go back on what I said last time and try to gear towards like a full coverage, whatever's happening, whatever I see, and just kind of tell from my perspective. So if you want to hear my insights on something, send me videos, send me links. I'll try to read up. It's basically whatever catches my eye. And living in Raleigh, the first thing that caught my eye over the weekend was the NC State Notre Dame game. Now, being close to the situation, I heard that they had discussed moving the game to either Friday or Sunday. Either day would have been better than Saturday. For some reason, they didn't move it, and it was a monsoon out there. The field was soaking wet. I recommend looking up videos of the game if you haven't seen it. There were puddles of water all over the field. The players were sliding up and down. Now, if you were into old games, like back in the day, football, where it was like a defensive struggle, that's what it was. You couldn't really pass because of how much rain and how wet the ball was. So they were going back and forth, just running. Old school football game. It was 3-3 into the fourth quarter. NC State blocks a punt and takes it into the house for a touchdown. My power went out though. I didn't get to see that part live. And because of how windy it was, I wasn't getting any radio or anything. And I didn't want to leave the house, try to stay safe. I couldn't get any streaming on my phone. So I had to watch the end of the game later. But it was a fun game, something you don't get to see too often, and go down and just see like a different aspect, like teams that prepare. You can see good coaching. I think like Brian Kelly, the coach at Notre Dame, he threw the ball like a ridiculous amount, and after the game he blamed it on his center for not snapping the ball good. That's why they lost. He pretty much threw him under the bus, but I don't get it, because like that's when you can see coaching adjustments in action. And I think college football, coach makes a big deal. Like a good coach can turn a team around. And with that, I feel like it's good to mention here that I am a Michigan alum. So I may be slightly biased. I know I didn't mention them in the earlier episodes, but I'm going to go ahead and do some coverage on that and just talk about them, because I feel like I might as well be open if I'm going to try to cover certain sports. My original idea was to just cover like a regional area close to where I live now, try to go see some games, take some photographs and things like that. But I feel like now, after listening, doing some research on different media outlets covering sports, I feel like any team's going to be game. I don't want to just regionalize it. Even other sports I might bring about once in a while. But, yeah, Michigan, I talked about a coach making a difference. You can just look at our team. Coach Harbaugh comes in, and he turns the whole program around. Ranked 4th right now, and it's all because of coaching. So we have the new rankings came out today. I was actually going to try to start recording on Sunday nights. I think I mentioned that last time. And try to have it out early Monday morning. But since I'm still getting in the groove of a new schedule, a new breakdown, I decided to wait until the NCAA football polls came out. So new polls were released. The first 5 teams didn't change. You have Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Michigan, and Washington. The first 4 teams all received at least one first place vote. And I guess 4 different conferences represented. SEC has Alabama, the Big Ten has Ohio State and Michigan, the ACC has Clemson, and the Pac-12 has Washington. Now, 2 of those teams, Ohio State and Michigan, do play last game of the year. So right now you're looking at having the Big 12 conference left out. And looking down, for Big 12 does have a team undefeated, Baylor, but they don't come in until number 11. They are going to have to jump Wisconsin, who's at 8, and Tennessee and Louisville. Tennessee's at 9th and Louisville's at 7. I don't know why I read those out of order. But Wisconsin plays Ohio State this weekend. So you could have Wisconsin win. Wisconsin already has, and it depends on how you look at things. Wisconsin already has 2 top 10 wins if you look at wins at the time the rankings were published. That's because they beat LSU when they were in the top 10. They are currently unranked. Wisconsin also beat Michigan State, who is in the top 10, also currently unranked. So I'm a believer in looking at wins on rankings at the end of the season. So how many teams right now did Michigan beat that are ranked currently? None. And they played Michigan, and they lost 14-7. A good game. They matched up well. It was a solid game. Came back, I think, down to a long touchdown pass. So they're in the top 10. If Ohio State beats them, that's 2 losses for them. I could see the Big 12 jumping them. They're also going to have to play Nebraska here. Texas A&M. They are going to have to play Alabama, so that's 2 top 10 teams. Actually, I think Tennessee plays Alabama this week too. If they play Alabama, yes, they do. the 15th. So Tennessee plays Alabama. So that means 2 teams are going to lose that are ahead of Baylor for sure this week, just based on the matchups. Now, let's say Tennessee and Wisconsin both pull off the upsets. I don't see Baylor jumping either Alabama or Ohio State. So the best course for the Big 12 to get into the playoffs is hoping that the favorites continue to win and that one of the other conferences gets 2 losses. Right now, the way the schedule lines up, I just don't see Ohio State or Michigan having 2 losses, and I don't see Clemson having 2 losses. Alabama would have to lose to Tennessee and Texas A&M, but Texas A&M is undefeated too. So I just don't see the SEC having 2 losses. So you're going to have the Pac-12 or the Big Ten, the SEC, and the ACC with a champion that I think is going to have 1 loss at the most. Based on the schedule here, if upsets play out, like I could see Wisconsin beating Ohio State, but then Ohio State beating Michigan, 1 loss. Michigan loses to Ohio State, that's 1 loss for them. They might get upset somewhere else, but then beat Ohio State, but that would still only be 1 loss for Michigan. Wisconsin could beat Ohio State, beat Nebraska. That's only 1 loss for Nebraska. So Baylor's going to need a lot of help, so you might as well count that the Big Ten is going to get a team in. So that means, and the same thing with the SEC, just too many top 10 teams that have already passed a lot of tests, that there's going to be 1 team that's only going to have 1 loss. So that means the SEC is going to be in the playoffs. And Clemson has already passed the Louisville test, and Florida State has been playing pretty bad. So I just don't see them losing 2 games either. Florida State already has 2 losses, so the best course for Baylor would be for Florida State to win the conference. But then again, they already lost to Louisville, and Louisville already lost to Clemson. So I don't see the math. I don't think the math is going to work in Baylor's favor in the ACC either. Even with Florida State at 2 losses, I just don't think they're going to be able to. I mean, it would be a 3-way tie, but Florida State already lost to UNC too. So it wouldn't be a 3-way tie; it would be a 2-way tie. And Clemson beating Louisville, they'd get the nod in the championship game. I think it should be head-to-head. I don't know exactly how the ACC tiebreakers work, but that's what it comes down to. Is going to be the Pac-12 and the Big 12 for that 4th playoff spot. Houston lost to Navy, and Houston still has to play Louisville. So that's going to be another game there where it could be a beatdown for Houston, and I just don't think a group of 5 is going to get into the playoffs this year either. And they're going to have a very, very tough time in the future. I think Boise State's still undefeated. Yeah, they are. They are ranked 15th, and they come in behind Houston. Houston is still ranked 13th. They're the 1st. Group of 5. I don't like the terminology, but I'm going to try to stay familiar as possible, talking the same things, the same terminology that every other site and media uses, just so listeners can keep up, or if you want to do your own research. And that's pretty much it for the polls. I don't see anything else that stands out. Miami had a chance to take Florida State to overtime. They missed. Unbelievable. They missed the extra point. It was blocked. And Florida State Miami has some history missing field goals, the wide rights, the wide lefts. So it's very interesting to see a game like that comes down to a missed kick. I think something that I see here at the bottom, West Virginia is still undefeated. That could help Baylor out, or that could help the Big 12 out. If West Virginia keeps winning, they could jump a lot of teams. And I mean, if either of those teams is undefeated, I thought Baylor was the only Big 12 undefeated team left. So the Big 12 has 2 hopes of an undefeated champion. And don't worry too much about West Virginia's ranked 20th. Don't worry about the 20th ranking right now, because they're going to keep climbing and climbing. An undefeated team never stays at 20th. So it's still way too early. Only week 7 rankings. Big 12 does have an extra shot. I just didn't realize that West Virginia, I didn't think an undefeated team would be ranked that low. Well, they do have Western Michigan too, who's 6-0, but they are in the group of 5. So basically, Boise State and Western Michigan, I don't think an undefeated team would not be ranked at this point. So there should be 2 group of 5s that are undefeated. Houston has 1 loss. I just don't see them getting in. And we can run down the standings real quick. The AAC, the American Athletic Conference, Navy beating Houston puts them in the driver's seat, and they look like they might be heading for a matchup with South Florida. The way that's working out, Navy was gonna play at East Carolina this Thursday, but because of the rain, it got pushed back. So that's the game to keep an eye on. It got moved back, so now Navy doesn't have an extra bye week at the end of the season. They do get a extra week of rest after their big win over Houston, so it probably works out in their favor because they would have had to come play on a short week, travel to East Carolina, who has a potent offense, but they're only 2-4. So I don't know if they would have been able to upset Navy, but I do know that the Hurricane probably played in Navy's favor. We talked about the ACC. Clemson is clearly in the driver's seat. They already have 3 conference wins, I think, on an 8-game schedule. So they're almost halfway there. On the coastal side, Virginia Tech crushed North Carolina. Another one of those games where you can see the coaching playing in the favor. It's a rainy game. They had almost the same exact conditions as NC State and Notre Dame, and their coach continued to throw the ball. It's like, just run it. Like, you know that there's a hurricane out here. Make some adjustments, coach. But he didn't make them, and I watched that game too. That game was a little bit harder to watch just because the score, it wasn't as close. Virginia Tech knew what to do. They had a game plan. They made the adjustments. Every team in that coastal division, though, has a loss. So that could be devastating whenever you have these major conferences that have one side have clearly better teams. Whenever the playoff committee, will be interesting to see, because it's bound to happen. If the Atlantic has Clemson and Louisville both at the top with only 1 loss, maybe Clemson's undefeated, Louisville has 1 loss, and Clemson gets upset in the championship game, would they put Louisville in? Would they put a potentially 2-loss team from the coastal in? And we'll see, and that could play out in any conference, just using the ACC as an example. Big 12, we talked about, they do have 2 undefeated teams, West Virginia and Baylor. Their best bet is that one of them stays undefeated. I don't think a 1-loss team from the Big 12 gets in this year. And Oklahoma, conference killer. The 2 losses they had out of conference just hurts them so bad because Ohio State's so good, and Houston just lost to Navy, so that hurts Oklahoma. In the Big Ten, the East is going to come down to Michigan and Ohio State, it looks like. And then in the West, right now, probably Nebraska and Wisconsin. So, and all 4 of those teams are in the top 10. So it's going to be looks like a pretty good year for the Big Ten before the playoffs start and the bowl games, because a rough bowl season could turn the tide for any conference. Conference USA going through. We have Middle Tennessee in the driver's seat in the East, it looks like, and Southern Mississippi in the West. Haven't been able to watch any of their games. I do think, it was probably Charlotte and Florida Atlantic that got rained out that I did see. The Independents, Notre Dame is a mess. I'd imagine. I don't think they're going to fire Kelly after this year, but I just don't know. I just don't know if they're going to fire Kelly after this year, just because he just got the extension. And then you have Army and BYU and Massachusetts. All these teams have multiple losses, so there's no independent that's going to get into the playoffs. You have Western Michigan in the MAC. As long as they keep rolling, they upset Oklahoma State, I believe, on the Hail Mary. That shouldn't have happened. No, they didn't. Central Michigan did. So I don't know if they have any signature wins. They only have a win over Northwestern. It looked like maybe someone else. But I don't know if that's enough to get them in. Oh, they have one over Illinois. 2 Big Ten team wins, but they're pretty much bottom feeders in the Big Ten. So I don't think that's going to be enough to get them into playoff. Maybe a good bowl game, depending on how Boise State shakes out. And talking about Boise State, the Mountain West Conference, Boise State is in first, and they're undefeated. That's the only chance Mountain West has of getting in either 6th game or a bowl game. Surprisingly, the West Division is led by Hawaii right now at 2-0 in conference, and Hawaii got destroyed by Michigan earlier in the season. So it would be interesting to see how that Hawaii team stacks up with the Mountain West if they can end up winning that West Division. The Pac-12, Washington State tore Stanford apart. Mike Leach is a great coach, and he's in a tough situation. I like him as a coach. I think he went through some unfair trials at Texas Tech, and Texas Tech is facing the consequences of that currently, where they can't get things going. But Washington State, they always lose an early game. Like they lost to FCS team, which is a subdivision, a step lower than what they are. And just looking at it, it's like, why? Why did they lose these games? And is Mike Leach going to be on the hot seat this year? But he always makes adjustments. His teams always get better as the year goes on. And now here they are, 2-0 in conference. It looks like it's going to become them in Washington. Hopefully they keep winning. It could be a big showdown to end the year against an in-state rival to see who wins the North. Oregon has looked like a mess. I think they're going to have a new coach. I don't know. He's been there for a while, so I just don't think it's like a turnover year. But I don't know too much about them. They were just in the championship. Was it because of Chip Kelly building up the team? I don't know. In the South is wide open. I thought Colorado or Utah might have the lead, but they both have a loss. And they're tied with Arizona State. So right now you have a 3-way tie in the South, and USC is playing the rule similar to Oklahoma, where they're going to be taking teams out, trying to get themselves back into it. And if by any chance USC was able to win the South, get to the championship game, and upset the North champion, what happens to the Pac-12 in the playoff race? Did they still get in with possibly an undefeated Washington losing in the Pac-12 championship game, having one loss? Do they recognize that championship and put another conference in? I surely don't think they would put an overall USC team in with 3 losses, but we'll see how that one shakes out. And on to the SEC. SEC has another big matchup this weekend with Alabama and Tennessee. Tennessee leads the East, and Alabama leads the West with A&M, Texas A&M, who's also in the top 10 and still undefeated after a crazy win over Tennessee. I don't know if you watched that game, but the Texas A&M player had broke away for a touchdown. It didn't look like he was running as hard as he could, and a Tennessee guy ran him down at the 5-yard line, punched the ball out through the end zone for a touchback. And Tennessee got the ball back with like a minute left or so and drove down and scored the tying touchdown. But in that situation, you would have to be the coach on the sideline telling your guy, hey, if you break away, either make sure you score so we go up 2 touchdowns, or just lay down after the first down and we'll run the clock out and win. So that's just a situation where I know these guys are young, so you can't be on the player too bad, but that's a coaching situation right there where the coach should be in his player's ear, telling them what to do. You're the coach them up. And instead, they go to overtime and they end up winning. Just a crazy situation, crazy game. But it was a fun game to watch. And the last conference, the Sun Belt Conference. App State's undefeated. They have 2 losses. They did lose to that Tennessee team in overtime, I believe. but they are currently trailing Troy. They just started conference play. So I would have to imagine that App State is the favorite. Although Arkansas State, I think, was pretty good last year. They already have 4 losses. But when you get down to these lower conferences, their losses could just be piling up from playing tougher competition. And baseball playoffs have started. Baseball playoffs are underway. And you have the play-in game. I still like. I don't know. You start with the play-in game. I don't know if we talked about it last week, but you have the one game to get into the division. I like the concept. It might take their ace down so that winning your division actually means something. I don't know if I'd like to see it expanded, though. They could do, and it might be. That's how they would rake the most money, is to do like a best of 3, all like a doubleheader the second day between them. Because right now, I think the other series is best of 5 and then a best of 7. So do a 2-day best of 3, like a college softball World Series. But that might be a little bit too much. But I mean, it's tough. I do like the concept where you play 162 games and then you go hot against these other guys and one game wins it or loses it. So now we're into the playoff schedule, and you have quite a few teams that could win it. I don't think there's a clear-cut winner. Cleveland and Boston. Cleveland's up 2-0 going into the game, the third game. And you also have, what's the other AL game? Texas and Toronto. And Toronto is, I think Toronto advanced, actually. I do know that the Hurricane Matthew had some changes, so it really kind of messed up my coverage of MLB this weekend. I was going to watch the Indians game yesterday. It got rained out. And so now we have some games that got shifted around. So yes, Toronto did win yesterday, so they advance. And the Indians are playing tonight. I think they have a chance to advance. The Cubbies are up 2 games on the Giants, and the Nationals are up 2-1 on the Dodgers. So those are the teams. I want to say the Toronto Orioles play-in game went extra innings. I could be wrong, but it's pretty interesting to see that they would go from extra innings in a play-in game to sweeping the number 1 seed in the AL. And so now we start to get a little bit more of a break. The one thing I had already talked about, not having cable, so it's tough to watch these games whenever they're on TBS. And I had the same gripe with the NBA playoffs and the NHL playoffs. Put some of the bigger games on the main station. They had the WNBA finals on Sunday on ABC. Fox has football, whatever. I understand the Sunday matchup. I understand the Sunday lineup. You can't put them on. But during the week, give your sitcoms a break. I mean, you're already trying to fill the airwaves with all these other crud programs. Put a big game on. Try to compete with the NFL. Shouldn't only be one sport on in October. So I think TBS has been carrying these. Fox might have broadcast a game or two. I had some power issues, so I'm not really 100% sure on baseball. We're going to get into baseball a little bit more once next week, once these first divisional series are over. And in the NFL, Chargers drove all the way down and couldn't get a field goal in at the end of the game. And they lost to the Raiders. Raiders could be the surprise team out in the AL West. Very impressed by them. I think they had a hot start last year, though, so I'm not too up on them. Tom Brady came back. He led the Patriots to yet another win. The Bills have been impressive, though, and the Bills did beat them, but I just don't see the Patriots. With Tom Brady back, I just don't see them losing the division. And now the NL, the Packers won, and they are 1 game behind the Minnesota Vikings. So the Vikings are a surprise team. They lose their starting quarterback in preseason camp, or it might even have been a preseason game. I know he got hurt in a non-contact injury just at practice. So he gets hurt. Everyone writes off the Vikings, yet they start 5-0. And in another surprise, Adrian Peterson, their star running back, also out. So they lose their starting quarterback and running back. That's some great coaching. Great coaching right there. Great defense. It'll be interesting to see if they can keep it going. The other big storyline in the NL is Tony Romo. When he comes back, the Cowboys are sitting here at 4-1. Dak Prescott, a rookie, and the Cowboys' rookie running back have had the team on a roll. I think they have one game before their bye week. So they play a game here coming up. So it'll be interesting to see if they make the switch on their bye week. And I think they play the Eagles after their bye week. So it could be two rookie quarterbacks facing off in 2 weeks here. But it will be interesting to see if they make the switch back to Tony Romo. So that's been a pretty good show here. We have the new format coming out. I'm probably going to stick about this length, maybe 20, 30 minutes talking about each topic, starting with the trends, tech, movies, music, anything that I'm kind of listening to, watching, seeing, playing through the first half of the podcast, any big news things, any speculation, and any rants. I might start going on rants. I've also discussed or talked to some people about having the opportunity of maybe having people call in, give some of their own rants, give some of their own feedback on things, but I just don't have the technical stuff set up yet. So that will be coming hopefully down the pipe. And the sports section, I do think it deserves kind of broken out in its own, because I don't want to alienate people. I might mix them up a little bit better. But for right now, we're going to give it a few goes, a couple weeks, see how it goes, see how the flow works, going from separating all the news, video games, movies, media to the front of the podcast and leaving the sports for last, and see what happens. Felt like a pretty good show today. So thank you for listening. And you've listened to the Socially Numb podcast with Richie Leahy.